Hello everyone, I am Megan with Marvelous Designer, and I am a 3D designer and community manager. Today I will be showing you the new features for version 9, as well as giving you some demos on those new features, as well as showing you how to manipulate your cloth in Marvelous Designer to create different types of wrinkles. So first of all, I'm going to do a quick run through of the features of version 9, and then I will show you some examples. First off, we do have GPU simulation. With GPU simulation, we are continuously updating and developing this new feature. We do not recommend GPU for animation. GPU is best for getting started in your fabrics, letting them drape, and then moving on to CPU simulation. GPU simulation doesn't have as good of a collision detection as CPU simulation, so for now, we do recommend utilizing it first when getting started. We also have Retopology. With Retopology, you can now simulate high-resolution garments first in Marvelous Designer, and then you can manually create custom lower poly versions of those garments without having to leave Marvelous Designer. We have added Subdivision. Originally, you could only have one particle distance option per pattern, and now you can have more than one, so the workload on your CPU is a lot lighter. We now have half pattern symmetry. It's very similar to symmetrical patterns, but now you just can work on one pattern piece and it will be symmetrical across a mirror line. As well as we have added mirror creation, so you can create your patterns across a mirrored axis as well. We have added a new environmental display for your scene, so you can see wind, lighting. You can also take away the grid if you really want. And we have updated our user interface just a little bit. We have now nested a lot of our pattern tools just with a long press on the left mouse button so that it'll be a lot easier to find the similar pattern tool groups. So that is just a quick introduction to the Marvelous Designer version 9 features. So let's actually get into showing you some examples. So for the first example, I'm going to go ahead and show you GPU simulation and open that file. There we are. So as you can see, I have two very large pattern pieces here. I'm going to go ahead and show you the density of their mesh. These all are 5 particle distance. Let's see. So we have 5 particle distance. So these are really, really dense. Zoom back out. So first of all, I'm going to show you CPU and simulate that one. And to do so, I'm going to deactivate GPU. And with CPU simulation, I'm going to go ahead and simulate in CPU. You can see how it is quite slow to simulate since the particle distance is at 5, which is very dense. It's going to take a lot of time for it to settle into its final resting position. So we'll just let it settle a little bit more, and then I'll go ahead and deactivate it. All right, close enough. I'm going to deactivate that one, reactivate GPU. All right, so to go to GPU, I'll just zoom in here. I'm going to long press. So as you can see, we have simulate complete nonlinear, simulate complete, simulate normal, which is CPU, and we now have GPU simulation. So I've selected GPU. I'm going to zoom back out, and I'm going to simulate using GPU simulation. It's going to take a second here, and then it's going to go ahead and fall. There it goes, and you can see how fast it is compared to CPU simulation. Though GPU simulation is much faster, there is a limit to GPU simulation. Due to its difference in algorithm, it is quite limited if you want to use it for animation mode, or if you want to do it with multiple layers of cloth, due to the collision differences between GPU and CPU simulation. So as you saw, it is best to start your work in GPU simulation, have it rest and settle, and then to move to CPU simulation and create your higher details here. So after GPU simulation, we're going to move on to half pattern symmetry. I'm just going to go ahead and delete everything, including my avatars, opening my library, half pattern simulation. I don't want to save. There we are. Working only in the 2D window this time. With half pattern simulation, originally you could just use unfold and there's your pattern unfolded. You could also select your pattern, right click, and use symmetric pattern with sewing, and you can see that these patterns are symmetrical, like so. But with half pattern symmetry, I can just select my line segment here, so long as it is perfectly straight, and use unfold with symmetric editing with sewing. I can select that, and it unfolds that along that line, which is now turned into a mirror segment line. And you can see when I move my pattern pieces, they mirror along that line. Same thing if I want to apply my internal lines. Let me zoom in here and show you the other feature, which we have just long press your tools, and you'll see that we've just kind of added a little nested toolbar here. So I can add one internal shape on one half of the pattern, and it does apply to the other half. I, of course, can move it around, and it is symmetrically linked to the other half of that pattern. Let's just go ahead and say that I'm done. I love it. This is what I wanted to change, and I want this pattern to no longer be symmetrically linked. All I have to do is right-click that pattern, and just like symmetrical patterns that are linked, you can just remove that linked editing. And if I only wanted one pocket square, I could do it like that. Now, if you prefer to work with symmetrical patterns and then afterwards merge them together, let's go ahead and step that all the way back. You can merge them together after the fact. So I've made a symmetrical pattern with sewing, and I want to merge them across that center line. I've done, let me just add something there. I've adjusted my pattern, it works. I don't want that seam anymore. Now, when you use merge, it merges those patterns and they're still symmetrically linked along that mirror line. And of course, if I'm done, I can just remove my linked editing. Now, I can also show you mirror creation. So again, zooming in, long press, and you can select your tools again. I can begin creation of my pattern by just left clicking, and then right click, and I can edit my length of my polygon here. But the new feature and the option is underneath that, mirror creation. I can create across the local axis, the x-axis, or the y-axis. It'll show you there's nothing there. I'm going to create one of each, so I'm going to go and create one across the x-axis. There's one pattern piece. I'll create one across local. And one across the y-axis. And I can create those patterns. And of course, as always, you can adjust them afterwards. There we are. And that is mirror creation. Next, we have Retopology. This feature did take quite some time to create, and we know a lot of people are excited to see it. As you can see at the top toolbars, we do have the new icons for both Retopology in 3D and in the 2D windows. Like other tools, it has a create option and an edit option. And you can see when I hover over the patterns using the create tool, the patterns that I'm working on will become white, and the patterns that I'm not working on are going to be grayed out. So I'm going to go ahead and pretend that my garment is perfectly draped and this is how I want it. So I'm going to start my Retopology in the 3D window just by creating a square face. And joining that square, you can see I'm just going to do it across the shoulder, and I can continue to create in the 2D window as well to be more accurate if that's something that I want to do. As I'm creating, I can just create my large faces here. Or if I wanted them to be a little bit more dense, I can use holding Shift and Control using the Create tool. I can divide the loops manually and Control Z to remove, as well as I can, using the Edit tool, right-click and add division to everything in this current pattern, so it will divide them all at once, and Control Z to step back. As well as using the Edit tool, I can select one or double-click to select the entire loop, holding Shift and Control to extrude. And I can go ahead and move those in the 2D or, of course, in the 3D window. While working in the same exact pattern, I can create more than one group of polygons. It looks very odd, but we'll just go ahead and go with that. And of course, I can move them around if I don't like it, or if I thought it wasn't very nice looking, which it's kind of not. And let's just say that I was done and I needed to join these pieces together. I can manually select the points, holding Shift, right-click, and I can merge them. Or another option is to right-click and select Merge All. And using Merge All, I can merge any points within a certain distance of each other. So I'm going to change this to 10 up here, and I'm going to apply that. I have now merged my points within that 10 millimeter area, the distance between each other. There's that. We'll just clean this up a little bit, make it look a little nicer. I'm going to move this pocket out of the way. As you can see, if I wanted to kind of draw on the pocket in 3D, I'd need to move it out of the way. So I'm just going to pull it out. So it's going to be best to work in kind of in layers. If your pocket is on top, you're going to want to trace your pocket first. So I'm doing that here in the 3D window. And with this one, I'm going to add a subdivision, as you can see. And then I can then follow my internal line and basically do the same thing here. Trace it just so I can keep the integrity of my drape in case it did affect or get changed, or it affects the drape when I'm working. So you can see the points are very similar, and I can even, let's just do this manually. I can see it here in my 3D window, the little shadow of my line, and I can make it match. There we are. And as you saw earlier, I can always right-click, merge all, anything within that certain distance, and then just adjust my points so it's nice and neat. Disconnect them. There we go. There we are. And so it's going to keep the integrity of the drape if if that pocket was reinforcing how it draped differently. Another option, I'm going to go ahead and close that, is let's just say that I'm done. This is my beautiful shirt. I can right-click, and I do have two options. I can remesh all and duplicate in the exact same space, or I can remesh all and replace it. So if I replace it, it removes everything that I didn't trace, so keep that in mind. I'm going to go ahead and step back, and I can right-click, remesh all, and duplicate. And with duplicate, it does copy in the exact same space, so I can, if I wanted, move my pattern pieces up in my 2D window. I'm going to do that here as well. Oops, I didn't need my higher quality ones. Whatever. Higher quality is always going to be on the top. And I'm going to turn on my mesh just so you can see it. I'll move those out of the way, and you can see that is my new retopologized mesh. There we are. So that is Retopology, and I can export these separately if I want, and I can keep the integrity of my main higher res garment still here in Marvelous Designer. Alrighty, I'm going to reset that and bring out Subdivision. Alrighty. With Subdivision, as you can see, we only have one particle distance set per pattern before utilizing Subdivision. You can see this pattern piece here is 20 particle distance. So if we created wrinkles, we would have to create a much larger file by increasing the amount of triangles here, as you can see. Bringing that back down to 20. Now I can go ahead and utilize the mesh tool. Again, nested. I can long press using the select mesh brush, box, or lasso tool. In this case, I just want to use the brush tool. I can change the size of my brush using the slider, but I don't want it to be that big. All right, we'll do 100 millimeters. And I can select in the 3D or the 2D window. So in the 3D window, I can select using my brush tool, right-click, and choose Subdivide. And it'll show up here in the property editor, and you can see it has taken the 20 particle distance, and this area is down to 5. It's been subdivided by 1 step. I can do it again, right-click, Subdivide, and I can bring it down to 2. So if you look over on the right side where the property editor is, you can see the subdivision options. We can go up from 0 to 3. Zoom back up. So you can see I've chosen 2, so it's exponential, basically. I can even name my subdivision. I can name it 2, wrinkle, fancy, if I want. So the reason that you can go from 0 to 3, and the reason we have allowed 0 to be there, so 0 brings it back up to 20 particle distance or whatever particle distance the actual pattern piece is if you're working and you want it to be a lot, you don't want to have to simulate those higher, all those triangles, you can use 0, bring in other pattern pieces so it takes off the workload from your computer. And since, I've named it, I can now just say, oh yeah, this is supposed to be 2. This is why it needs to be 2, and I can bring it back down. And just for fun, in the 2D window, I'm going to show you 3. And there are the 3 levels of the subdivision. I'm going to go ahead and deactivate this, and I'll show it to you kind of in a more in a practical way. So as you can see, simulating, and I'll turn off the flash, I have made the one on the left a 20 or a 10 particle distance, and the one on the right is 20. So 10, it's really nice, especially right up here at the top where all the wrinkles are sewing into that one rectangle. It's a lot nicer. It drapes a lot more realistic and a lot softer compared to the 20 particle distance, which is a lot more blocky. But the one on the left is going to be a lot more dense of a pattern piece, so this file is actually going to be quite larger when you try to save it. So a workaround for that, I'm going to go ahead and freeze that. Bring back fabric. In the 2D window, I'm just going to go ahead and select just that top area, because I only want the top to look nice in this case. I'm going to go ahead and right-click and subdivide. I'll keep it at subdivision 1, because it does bring it down to 10 particle distance in that area. Going back, okay, deselecting, and if I simulate, the top looks very similar to the one on the left, which is all entirely 10 particle distance, whereas the one on the right is 20 only on the bottom. So it's going to be a lot easier to simulate, and I don't have to put all that load onto my CPU. And since we're here, I'll turn this back on. We do have those new scene options. So we have our light source zooming out. You can see the light source. I'll turn on shadows. And you can move your light source around, as well as turning off shadows and light source. You do have a wind option as well in the scene now. And you can see on the right, I can activate wind if that's something I wanted. Deactivating, I can now turn off wind, turn off the wind feature, and lastly, I can turn off the grid if that is something that I want to do. Turning the grid back on. And as you saw me kind of touch on it before, the tools, whoops, let's go back. The toolbar, especially in the Sewing 2D window, we have the little arrows in the bottom right-hand corner. Just long press them, and we've nested all the like tools together. So those are the quick examples and demos of the new version 9 features for Marvelous Designer.